So, I got a couple of pleasant surprises this past week. I rewatched a movie that I've only watched once on VHS, so that tells you how long ago that was, and I hated it at the time, and had a horrible rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And you know what I found? I can't for the life of me figure out why. I'm talking about Starship Troopers. Yeah. This seems to be a divisive film, at best. One thing you need to know going into Starship Troopers is this is one of those movies that is based on a book. Yeah. In that it takes a title, a few names, and it really has nothing to do with the book. And in most cases, I consider that sacrilege. But here, it actually kind of works. And the other thing you'll notice watching this film is that it's been hugely influential, at least its look has. I don't think Halo would look the way it does, for one, if this movie had not existed. But yeah, this is really a movie that I don't think could be made today, with its frank depiction of violence and the fact that and the dehumanizing effects of war. In fact, in many ways, this movie feels more adult in its depiction of war than the much more critically lauded Saving Private Ryan, which came out a year or two after this. Yeah, it feels more realistic too, in that nobody's got a character shield, and nobody does things for sentimental reasons. You don't do things for sentimental reasons in war. You don't risk your whole, without any proof, you don't send a whole squad off to rescue someone. In fact, it feels like a rebuttal to Saving Private Ryan, even though Saving Private Ryan came out later, since the film actually has a climax that hinges on our main character actually having to decide whether or not to send his squad off blind on an alien planet to save one person. And before he has any proof that that person is still alive, he's not about to send any proof that he won't lose all his men. He's not about to do that. But yeah, Starship Troopers is really a coming-of-age tale of young people, and it's the sort of thing that just doesn't get... It's a sort of satirical look at that sort of story, but it's also not, in that it has this weird place in that I'm not sure, and I think this is why it has such a low critical rating, because on the one hand, it's hard to say what it's trying to say. On the one hand, it puts our heroes in Nazi-style uniforms and such, but it's not actually depicting anything negative, really. I mean, when you really come down to it, the closest thing it has to being... Everything seems to be running fine on their world. They don't seem to be practicing... There doesn't seem to be racism or anything. And the enemy they're fighting are giant bugs that eat people's brains and send asteroids into planets and kill 8 million people in an instant. And there doesn't really seem to be much of a chance of talking things out with these bugs or getting a peaceful solution with them. So it's sort of weird in that way. But it's also one of the best depictions of war I've ever seen in any movie. I mean, it has real consequences. The plot structure of this movie is actually very close to what I went in expecting from the Star Trek reboot, in that you have a young hero going into the academy to try and make something of his life, and then and then he makes mistakes and he has to learn from them. I mean, but here's the difference. In the new Star Trek reboot, he makes mistakes and he's told, well, your father was the greatest captain ever, so here's the keys to a spaceship. And the people who have problems with your mistake, they're the ones who have to learn something. This movie is the exact opposite. He makes one little mistake, it gets somebody killed in a training exercise, and boy, does our hero have to pay for it. Yeah, and yeah, he's publicly flogged for getting someone killed. And here's the thing: I think it's supposed to be a statement. I think Paul Verhoeven, the director, intended this to be a statement on how brutal this culture is. But at the moment in the movie, when you're watching it, it actually feels earned in that you saw this guy, you saw this kid he was supposed to be in charge of just die horribly in a training exercise that shouldn't have gotten him killed, all because our hero broke a rule. So, yeah, while it's kind of brutal, it kind of feels like, yeah, that's brutal, but you kind of deserve it since a guy died. Ugh. And there is a love triangle plot that I personally wouldn't have bothered with in this thing. But on the other hand, it just, I don't know, it's brutal. The movie is still brutal after all these years. It is brutal, way more brutal than, I mean, people get torn up. If they're lucky to be alive, people, and it actually feels like depictions of real soldiers, not the Hollywood version of them, for all their flaws and virtues. So, yeah, it feels like not only, it may have replaced Aliens now as my favorite sci-fi action film of all time. And when I say sci-fi action film, I'm not including things like Star Wars or Star Trek. Star Trek is more sci-fi exploration. Star Wars is sci-fi fantasy. I'm talking about, when I think of sci-fi action, I think of something like Terminator or Aliens or something where the action is the main focus, and many times it's a depiction of war in there. The focus is on a depiction of war and what it does to people. And this movie does it pretty much better than any other science fiction. And there are probably only a few war movies I've seen that do this better. And it's just random. Nobody has character shields. People randomly die. You have bad intelligence, and our hero becomes grizzled. And they show how, the idealistic person becomes grizzled. And, if anything, it reminds me of, I've read a lot of things written and seen interviews with soldiers who fought in the Pacific Campaign, where you had to hop island to island. And in World War II, the Pacific Campaign, unlike Germany, a lot of our soldiers seemed to have felt more disconnected there because we didn't know as much about Japanese culture as we did about German culture at the time. So you felt like you were going on, and what's more, you had heard of some of the places you were fighting. If you went off to the European front, you had heard of some of the places you were fighting there. When you were fighting in the Pacific, most of these things were tiny islands that even people who made maps barely knew the name of, let alone your average 19-year-old being sent in as a Marine to clear out an island from an enemy they couldn't understand the language of, and with their bonsai charges wasn't surrendering, even when and it was like, and I'm just saying, it was alien. It felt like it seems like they felt so alienated, because even when they would beg mothers not to jump off cliffs with their babies, they would still do it in the Pacific Campaign. And in the European theater, you had people, and I'm not trying to make some sort of racial statement about Japanese, I'm just saying that that's what this feels like. It feels very inspired by the Pacific Campaign, which I feel like most sci-fi action is inspired by the European theater. This feels like they're just going to one rock after another. They don't know why. One alien planet after another, getting in these bloody battles, and I would just say it's excellent, but it earns its R rating very much. But if you want a good sci-fi action film, watch Starship Troopers, because it is one of the most perfect examples of this and the war genre I have ever seen. I don't know what I was thinking when I saw this on VHS, and I don't know why it has such a low rating on Rotten Tomatoes, but it does, and it didn't earn it. You can get it for like $5 UHD. That's what I did. I got a gift card for Voodoo for Christmas, and that's how I saw it again. And it is well worth your time, and it sure beats a lot of the garbage that's being turned out in theaters now. And I'll tell you, it's just really well thought out, really well put together, and it doesn't. It's one of those movies that is just honest about, you know, war in real life and not having many good guys or bad guys. It's just, no one's clearly a good guy. There aren't any clear villains or heroes. It's more of people doing their jobs, which is, from my research, what real war is. And it just feels honest. And it's refreshing these days to find a movie that is just being honest and not trying to push an agenda and claim that its filmmaker has all the answers to life, and it doesn't have, and it claims to have some sort of message that if you just do this, every problem in the world will go away. It's a refreshing film to see in this day and age. Alright, hope you found this interesting. See you later.